Mateo Rivera was 41 years old when his wife of 12 years poured a $450 bottle of Chateau Margaux down the front of his khaki pants at the Peninsula Hotel in Beverly Hills. And the 200 corporate executives watching had no idea they were witnessing the beginning of the most expensive mistake of her career. He stood there, wine dripping onto the white marble floor of the Crystal Ballroom, while his wife Jessica, dressed in a custom Armani suit worth $8,700, laughed along with her new boss, Richard Caldwell, CEO of Meridian Dynamics. The contract on the table between them represented an $800 million acquisition deal, the culmination of Jessica's meteoric rise from regional sales manager to executive vice president in just 4 years. Her salary had jumped from $125,000 to $680,000 annually, plus stock options worth another $2.3 million. She'd earned every dollar through brutal 80-hour weeks, strategic networking, and stepping on anyone who got in her way, including her husband. "God, Mateo, you're so clumsy," Jessica said, not even looking at him as she signed the final page of the merger agreement. "This is the biggest day of my career, and you can't even hold a wine glass properly. Why don't you go clean yourself up in the bathroom? The adults are trying to conduct business here." The laughter rippled through the crowd. Mateo recognized several faces: board members from Caldwell Industries, investment bankers from Goldman Sachs who'd structured the deal, Jessica's entire executive team from her company, Vertex Solutions. They'd all watched him fumble the wine glass she'd deliberately knocked from his hand. They all saw the cheap JCPenney shirt he was wearing, the Timex watch worth $89, the nervous smile of a man who didn't belong in this world of private jets and 8-figure bonuses. What none of them knew, what Jessica had been too busy climbing the corporate ladder to notice, was that Mateo Rivera wasn't the struggling IT consultant making $73,000 a year that she introduced him as. He was the primary shareholder and silent founder of Caldwell Industries, the $4.2 billion private equity firm that was about to acquire her company. And the contract she was signing with such pride was going to destroy her in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. But Mateo wasn't ready to reveal that yet. Not here, not now. He'd been planning this moment for 18 months, ever since the night he'd come home early from a supposed client meeting and overheard Jessica on the phone with her divorce attorney, mapping out how to leave him the moment her Vertex stock options vested, scheduled for 3 weeks after this acquisition closed. "Of course, honey," Mateo said quietly, grabbing a cloth napkin from the nearest table. "I'm sorry, I'll wait in the lobby." "Don't bother waiting," Jessica said, barely glancing at him as she shook hands with Richard Caldwell. "This celebration dinner is going to run late. Take an Uber home. I'll be back whenever." Mateo nodded, playing the part perfectly. The part he'd been playing for 4 years while Jessica climbed her ladder and forgot about the man who'd supported her through business school at UCLA, who'd paid $47,000 of her student loans, who'd moved across the country 3 times for her career. The man she'd started calling "my starter husband" to her friends when she thought he wasn't listening. He walked out of the Crystal Ballroom with wine stains on his pants and humiliation burning in his chest, the exact image Jessica wanted people to see. What she didn't see was the text message Mateo sent from his phone as he stepped into the elevator. "Initiate Phase 2. Caldwell acquisition of Vertex approved. Execute the Zimmerman clause." The recipient was Sandra Okonkwo, the $950 an hour attorney who'd been working on Mateo's behalf for the past 14 months, and who happened to be the managing partner at Frost & Okonkwo, LLP, the same firm that had structured the Vertex acquisition deal. The Zimmerman clause was something Jessica's own lawyers had missed in their review of the 847-page merger agreement. It was named after Mateo's late mentor, David Zimmerman, who taught him that the best revenge in business wasn't loud. It was buried in subsection 12.4c of legally binding contracts. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded corporate revenge and shocking power reversals, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new stories here every day, each one more intense than the last one. And tell me where you are watching from. The story of how Mateo Rivera became the silent majority shareholder of Caldwell Industries started 19 years earlier in a Stanford dorm room with a kid from East Los Angeles who had a full scholarship and a gift for predicting market trends. Mateo had been 22 years old when he developed an algorithm that could predict private equity opportunities 6 months before they became obvious to traditional investors. His roommate, Richard Caldwell, had been the trust fund kid with $12 million in family money and connections that opened doors Mateo couldn't even find. They'd made a deal. Mateo would provide the intelligence and analysis. Richard would provide the capital and be the public face. They'd split everything 60-40, with Mateo holding the majority stake. They'd signed the partnership agreement on September 3, 2005, in the presence of David Zimmerman, who was then a junior attorney at a small firm in Palo Alto. The agreement was ironclad. Mateo would remain a silent partner, unnamed in public filings, his ownership held through a series of blind trusts and shell corporations that even the SEC had approved. Over 19 years, Caldwell Industries had grown from a $12 million startup to a $4.2 billion private equity powerhouse. Mateo had made every major investment decision. Richard had been the charismatic CEO who took credit at conferences and charity galas. And Mateo had been perfectly fine with that arrangement because the money was spectacular. His personal net worth was currently $847 million. And he genuinely enjoyed the analytical work more than the spotlight. Then he'd met Jessica at a tech conference in Austin in 2012. She'd been a rising star at a mid-sized software company, ambitious and brilliant and beautiful. He'd been attracted to her drive, her intelligence, her refusal to settle for mediocrity. They'd married 8 months later in a simple ceremony at Santa Monica Beach. Mateo had told her he worked as an independent IT consultant, which was technically true. He did consulting work for Caldwell Industries. He just hadn't mentioned that he owned 60% of the company. Why hadn't he told her? At first it was a test. He'd grown up watching his mother get taken advantage of by men who wanted access to her money. She'd won $2.4 million in a lawsuit against a negligent employer when Mateo was 12. And the parade of opportunistic boyfriends had taught him to be careful about who knew about wealth. He'd wanted to make sure Jessica loved him for him, not for his money. But then the months became years, and Jessica's career took off, and Mateo realized he enjoyed being underestimated. He liked watching her navigate corporate politics, liked supporting her from the shadows. He'd helped her prepare for interviews, given her advice on negotiations, even used his Caldwell connections to get her resume in front of the right people at Vertex Solutions. She'd never known that the lucky break that landed her the VP position had come from a recommendation Mateo had quietly arranged. For 8 years, their marriage had been good. Different, maybe, with Jessica constantly traveling and Mateo working from their home office in Pasadena. But good. They'd bought a modest house for $680,000 in a nice neighborhood, drove reasonable cars. Jessica had a Lexus ES 350 worth $47,000. Mateo kept his old Honda Accord worth maybe $8,000. They talked about having kids someday when Jessica's career stabilized. Then Jessica got the Vertex UWI position 4 years ago, and everything changed. The late nights became later. The business trips became more frequent. The salary jumped to $680,000, and suddenly Mateo's supposed $73,000 consulting income seemed inadequate to her. She started making comments, little digs about his modest career, his lack of ambition, his contentment with mediocrity. She started attending charity events without him, claiming he wouldn't fit in with her corporate crowd. She started introducing him as, "My husband, he's in IT," with a tone that suggested she was apologizing for his existence. Mateo had tolerated it because he loved her, because he believed marriages went through rough patches, because he kept thinking she'd remember who she'd been before the corner office in the stock options. Then came the night 18 months ago that changed everything. Mateo had told Jessica he had a late client meeting. He actually did, a video call with Richard Caldwell about a potential acquisition in the pharmaceutical sector. The meeting ended early, around 9:15 p.m. on a Tuesday in March 2023. Mateo drove home to their house on Oakmont Drive in Pasadena, pulled into the garage, and heard Jessica's voice coming from the back patio. She was on the phone, drinking wine, laughing in a way she hadn't laughed with him in years. "No, Diane, I'm serious," Jessica was saying. "The moment my Vertex options vest after this Caldwell acquisition, I'm filing. Mateo has been dead weight for years. He's sweet, sure, but God, I need a partner who matches my energy, you know? Someone who operates at my level." Mateo had frozen in the kitchen doorway, car keys still in his hand. "I've already talked to Howard Finch. Yeah, the divorce attorney, the one who got Sarah $8 million from her ex. He says because California is community property, Mateo is entitled to half of everything I've earned during the marriage, which is infuriating because he's contributed basically nothing. But Howard's working on an angle. We can argue that my career success was entirely my own effort, especially since Mateo's income has been so minimal. We might be able to get my settlement exposure down to maybe $400,000 or $500,000. She'd paused, listening to her friend on the other end. "No, I don't feel guilty. I've outgrown him, Diane. I'm making $680,000 a year, plus stock options worth millions. I'm having dinner with CEOs and venture capitalists, and I come home to a guy who gets excited about fixing computer problems and thinks Olive Garden is fine dining. I deserve better. I deserve someone from my world." Another pause, then laughter. "Oh God, you should see how he looks at these corporate events when I drag him along. Like a puppy that knows he doesn't belong but is trying so hard to fit in. It's honestly embarrassing. Richard Caldwell even asked me once if Mateo was intellectually curious enough for someone of my caliber. Can you imagine?" Mateo had stood there for another 10 minutes, listening to his wife of 10 years describe him like a piece of furniture she was planning to donate to Goodwill. When she finally ended the call and came inside, he'd pretended he'd just arrived home, kissed her cheek, and asked about her day. "Just the usual corporate nonsense," Jessica had said, already looking at her phone. "You wouldn't understand." That night, Mateo had made 3 decisions. First, he would let Jessica proceed with her plan. He wouldn't reveal his wealth, wouldn't fight to save a marriage she'd already abandoned in her heart. He would give her exactly what she wanted, the freedom to leave him for someone from her world. Second, he would make sure the Caldwell acquisition of Vertex Solutions went through. Jessica wanted those stock options to vest? Perfect. Mateo would personally ensure the deal happened. As the majority shareholder of Caldwell Industries, he had that power. Richard didn't make major acquisition decisions without Mateo's approval. Third, he would teach Jessica a lesson about underestimating people. Not through violence, not through public humiliation, through the same tool she'd used to climb her corporate ladder. Cold, calculated business strategy. He'd called Sandra Okonkwo the next morning. She'd been David Zimmerman's protege before David died of cancer in 2019, and she knew everything about Mateo's ownership structure at Caldwell Industries. He'd paid her firm $340,000 over the following 14 months to do 3 things. Structure the Vertex acquisition with specific clauses that would benefit Mateo while appearing standard to Vertex's legal team. Prepare divorce papers that would reveal Mateo's true net worth at the strategically perfect moment, and create an airtight post-nuptial agreement that Jessica would have unknowingly violated through her plans to divorce Mateo for financial gain. The Zimmerman clause in subsection 12.4c of the merger agreement was brilliant in its simplicity. It stated that any Vertex executive who initiated divorce proceedings within 24 months of the acquisition closing date would forfeit all stock options and bonuses tied to the merger, with those forfeited assets reverting to Caldwell Industries. The clause was buried in dense legal language about commitment to organizational stability and executive retention incentives. Vertex's lawyers had signed off on it because similar clauses weren't uncommon in major acquisitions. Companies wanted to prevent their newly acquired executives from immediately jumping ship. What made it devastating for Jessica specifically was that Mateo had ensured she was classified as a primary executive in the merger agreement, which meant the clause applied to her stock options worth $2.3 million, her retention bonus of $1.8 million, and her accelerated vesting schedule for future Caldwell stock options worth an estimated $4.7 million over 3 years. If Jessica filed for divorce before November 2026, which her own words to her attorney had indicated she planned to do in 3 weeks, she would lose $8.8 million. And because the forfeiture clause was in the merger agreement she'd signed, there was nothing she could do about it. It was legally binding. But Mateo wasn't stopping there. He'd also had Sandra prepare what she called the nuclear option, a full disclosure of Mateo's true net worth and ownership stake in Caldwell Industries, time to be revealed during divorce proceedings. Under California community property law, Jessica would be entitled to half of all assets acquired during the marriage. Mateo's Caldwell ownership predated their marriage, but his earnings from that ownership during their 12 years together were community property. Sandra had calculated that Jessica's fair share of the marital estate would be approximately $127 million, based on the appreciation of Mateo's Caldwell stake during their marriage, plus their shared home, vehicles, and other minor assets. But here was the beautiful irony. If Jessica proceeded with her plan to divorce Mateo while positioning herself as the higher-earning spouse, claiming he'd contributed basically nothing to their financial success, she would have already forfeited her $8.8 million in Vertex-related compensation. She'd entered divorce proceedings having just lost nearly $9 million because of her own impatience. And when Mateo revealed his true net worth, she'd realized she could have had $127 million if she'd just stayed married to the man she considered dead weight. The emotional devastation would be exquisite. Mateo had spent 18 months setting up every domino. He'd encouraged Jessica to pursue the EVP position at Vertex. He'd subtly nudged Richard Caldwell toward viewing Vertex as an acquisition target. Easy to do since Mateo's analysis showed it genuinely was a smart investment. He'd sat through dinners where Jessica talked about him like he was invisible, smiled through company events where her colleagues openly pitied her for having such an unsuccessful husband, all while knowing that the company she was about to sign with, the $800 million deal she was celebrating as her crowning achievement, was owned by the man she was planning to discard. And tonight, watching her pour wine on him in front of 200 people, hearing her call him clumsy and useless, Mateo had felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Not anger exactly, something cleaner than that. Clarity. She'd made her choice. Now he'd let her live with the consequences. 3 days after the signing ceremony, Mateo sat in the home office of their Pasadena house, watching through his computer monitor as Jessica prepared for her first official meeting as an executive of Caldwell Industries. She was in their bedroom down the hall, on a video call with her assistant, discussing the agenda for today's integration planning session at Caldwell's Century City headquarters. "Make sure the car service knows to pick me up at 8:30 sharp," Jessica was saying, applying makeup while balancing her phone on the dresser. "And confirm that Richard Caldwell will be in the meeting. I want to make a strong impression as we transition into the new structure." Mateo smiled slightly. Richard would indeed be in that meeting. So would Mateo, though Jessica didn't know that yet. Today was the beginning of Phase 3. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard Caldwell. Board meeting confirmed for 2 p.m. All directors will be present. Are you sure you want to do this? Matteo typed back. Absolutely sure. Time to stop being invisible. For 19 years, Matteo had been content to let Richard be the face of Caldwell Industries, while he operated from the shadows, making the real decisions. But Jessica's treatment of him had awakened something he hadn't felt in years, a desire to be seen for who he actually was. Not to impress her, not anymore, but to make her understand the magnitude of her mistake. The integration meeting started at 10 a.m. Matteo arrived at Caldwell's offices at 9:45, using the private executive elevator that led directly to the secure boardroom on the 42nd floor. He designed this space himself 5 years ago. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Los Angeles, a $67,000 custom conference table made from reclaimed California walnut, original artwork from emerging artists worth approximately $340,000 collectively. Richard was already there, along with 6 other Caldwell board members. They all knew Matteo, of course. They'd all signed NDAs regarding his ownership stake. These were people who managed pension funds worth billions, sovereign wealth fund managers, former Fortune 500 CEOs. They treated Matteo with the respect his position and intelligence deserved. "She has no idea?" asked Margaret Chen, the former CEO of a $12 billion pharmaceutical company who now sat on 3 corporate boards. "Not even a suspicion?" "None," Matteo confirmed, adjusting his tie. Today he wasn't wearing JCPenney clearance items. He wore a custom Tom Ford suit worth $6,800, Berluti shoes worth $1,900, and a Patek Philippe watch worth $87,000. A gift from Richard 10 years ago when Caldwell Industries hit its first billion in assets under management. "This is going to be devastating," said James Thornton, Caldwell's CFO, who managed the firm's $4.2 billion in capital. "Are you absolutely certain this is how you want to handle it?" Matteo thought about the wine-stained khakis he'd worn home from the Peninsula Hotel 3 days ago. Thought about Jessica's laughter as he'd stood there, humiliated. Thought about 18 months of planning, of being called dead weight by the woman who'd promised to love him in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. "I'm certain," he said. The Vertex executives began arriving at 9:55 a.m. Matteo watched them on the security monitors. Jessica was among the first, wearing a burgundy Armani suit worth $7,200, carrying a Dior handbag worth $5,800. She looked confident, powerful, ready to impress her new corporate overlords. She entered the boardroom at exactly 10 a.m., followed by 6 other Vertex executives. Richard Caldwell stood to greet them, playing his role perfectly. "Welcome to Caldwell Industries," Richard said, shaking hands around the room. "We're excited to have the Vertex team officially joining our family. Please, have a seat." Jessica took a position near the head of the table, directly across from Richard. She didn't even glance at the other board members seated along the sides. Why would she? They were just corporate suits to her. She certainly didn't look at Matteo, who was seated 3 chairs to her right, reviewing a document. "Before we begin the integration discussion," Richard continued, "I want to introduce someone who's been fundamental to Caldwell Industries' success, but who operates outside the public eye. Many of you may not be familiar with him, but he's the reason this acquisition happened. Matteo, would you like to say a few words?" Jessica was taking notes on her iPad. She glanced up politely when Richard said, "Matteo," probably expecting some middle manager or technical consultant. Then she saw who Richard was gesturing to. Her husband, sitting at the board table, wearing a suit that cost more than she made in a month. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you have not, because the ending of this story will blow your mind. And drop a comment below telling me what you think Matteo should do next. The confusion on Jessica's face was almost comical. She looked at Matteo, then at Richard, then back at Matteo. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "Good morning, everyone," Mateo said calmly, standing. For those who don't know me, I'm Mateo Rivera. I'm the founding partner and majority shareholder of Caldwell Industries, holding a 60% equity stake through a series of blind trusts established in 2005. I've been involved in every major acquisition this firm has made over the past 19 years, including the decision to acquire Vertex Solutions for $800 million. Jessica's face had gone completely white. One of the other Vertex executives, a man named Greg Turner, who Mateo recognized from the Peninsula Hotel signing, whispered, "Wait, I thought you were the IT guy." "I do consulting work in technology analysis," Mateo clarified, "which is technically IT adjacent. But my primary role has been strategic oversight at Caldwell Industries since I founded the company with Richard in 2005. He let that sink in for a moment, watched Jessica's mind trying to process what she was hearing, watched the other Vertex executives exchange confused glances. "The reason I've remained a silent partner," Mateo continued, "is partly due to privacy preferences, partly due to SEC regulations around certain investment structures, and partly because I prefer analytical work to publicity. Richard has been an excellent public-facing CEO, and our partnership has been mutually beneficial." He pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The screen behind him lit up with a slide showing the Caldwell Industries ownership structure, including the specific trust arrangements that held Mateo's 60% stake. All legally documented, all verified by external auditors, all absolutely real. "However," Mateo said, "I've decided it's time to be more visible in the company's operations, particularly as we integrate major acquisitions like Vertex. So going forward, I'll be taking a more active role in executive oversight." Jessica found her voice. "Mateo, when were you planning to tell you I own the company you just joined?" Mateo finished for her. "Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it?" The room had gone completely silent. The other Caldwell board members were watching with carefully neutral expressions. The Vertex executives looked like they'd stumbled into a family intervention. Mateo pulled out his phone, pressed a few buttons, and a new slide appeared on the screen. It was a calendar showing the next 24 months marked in red. "According to the merger agreement that Vertex executives signed on November 18th, Mateo said, there's a retention clause in subsection 12.4c requiring executive commitment to organizational stability. Specifically, any primary executive, that includes you, Jessica, as well as Greg Turner and Patricia Morrison from your team, who initiates divorce proceedings within 24 months of the acquisition closing date, will forfeit all stock options and performance bonuses tied to this merger." He pulled up another slide showing the specific dollar amounts. Jessica's forfeiture would total $8.8 million if she divorced within the restricted period. "Now, I'm not saying this to be cruel," Mateo continued, looking directly at his wife. "I'm saying it because our integration planning needs to account for executive stability, and I want to make sure everyone understands the contractual obligations they've agreed to." Jessica's hands were shaking. She was gripping her iPad so hard her knuckles had turned white. "Mateo, can we talk privately?" she managed. "Of course," Mateo said smoothly, "but let's finish this meeting first. We have a lot of integration details to cover, and I know you're very excited about your new role here. After all, you told 200 people at the Peninsula Hotel that this was the biggest day of your career." The emphasis on those words made several board members shift uncomfortably. Richard Caldwell was studying the table, clearly fighting a smile. Mateo spent the next 90 minutes walking through the integration plan he'd personally designed. He was brilliant at this. He knew every financial model, every market analysis, every competitive advantage Caldwell could leverage from the Vertex acquisition. The other board members chimed in with questions and suggestions, treating Mateo with obvious deference and respect. Jessica sat frozen, barely participating, while her colleague Greg Turner kept shooting her confused glances. The woman who'd been so confident 90 minutes ago had completely disappeared. Finally, at 11:30 a.m., Richard called for a break. "Let's reconvene at 1 p.m. to discuss the technology integration roadmap," he said. "Matteo, thank you for that comprehensive overview." The room cleared quickly. The Vertex executives clustered together in the hallway, whispering urgently. Matteo could imagine the conversation. "Did you know her husband was a billionaire? Why is she living in a $680,000 house if he owns Caldwell Industries? Why did she tell everyone he was just an IT consultant?" Jessica approached Matteo slowly, like she was walking toward a tiger that might attack. "Your office or mine?" Matteo asked pleasantly. "You have an office here?" "I have a private office on the 45th floor. Come on." He led her to the elevator, inserted a special key card, and rode up in silence. The 45th floor was executive territory. Only 6 offices, all corner suites with spectacular views. Matteo's office was at the end of the hall, a 800-square-foot space with custom built-in bookshelves, a sitting area with a $18,000 Italian leather sofa, and a desk made from zebra wood that had cost $23,000. Jessica walked in like she was entering a dream or a nightmare. "Sit down," Matteo said, gesturing to the chairs facing his desk. She sat. He remained standing, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline. "How long have you owned this company?" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. 19 years, since before we met." "Why didn't you tell me?" Matteo turned to face her. "At first, I wanted to make sure you loved me for who I was, not what I had. My mother went through a parade of men who only wanted her money after she won a lawsuit settlement. I'd learned to be careful. But we've been married for 12 years. You never thought to mention you're worth, what, hundreds of millions?" $847 million as of this morning's portfolio valuation, Matteo said calmly. "And yes, I thought about telling you, many times. But then your career took off, and I realized something interesting." He sat down across from her now, close enough to see the tears forming in her eyes. "I realized I liked being underestimated," he continued. "I liked watching you navigate your corporate world, liked supporting you behind the scenes. Do you know how you got your first interview at Vertex?" Jessica stared at him. "I had Richard make a call to the CEO. You were qualified. I never would have recommended you if you weren't. But that first door, I opened it for you." "You, what?" "The mentorship from Patricia Morrison that accelerated your promotion to EVP? I suggested you to her at a charity event in 2021. The introduction to the venture capital firm that helped fund Vertex's Series D round? I arranged that too. I was proud of you, Jessica. I wanted to see you succeed." Tears were running down her face now. "Then why are you doing this? Why humiliate me in front of the board?" If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. I am enjoying this story, and tell us what you would have done in Matteo's situation. Matteo pulled out his phone and opened a recording app. He pressed play. Jessica's voice filled the office. "Matteo has been dead weight for years. He's sweet, sure, but God, I need a partner who matches my energy, you know? Someone who operates at my level." Her face went from white to gray. "I've been planning to divorce you for 18 months, Matteo said quietly. "Ever since the night I came home early and heard you on the phone with Diane, talking to your divorce attorney about how to minimize what I'd get in the settlement. Talking about how I was embarrassing you, about how you deserve someone from your world. Matteo, did you know," he continued, his voice still eerily calm, "that under California community property law, you're entitled to half of all assets acquired during our marriage? My Caldwell ownership predated our marriage, but the appreciation of that stake during our 12 years together, approximately $254 million in increased value, is community property. Your fair share would be about $127 million, plus half of our house and other minor assets." Jessica's mouth fell open. "If you'd stayed married to me, if you'd just been patient, you could have eventually divorced amicably and walked away with $127 million. Instead, you're planning to file for divorce 3 weeks from now, right after your stock options vest. Except now those options are tied to the retention clause. File for divorce before November 2026, and you lose $8.8 million. All because you couldn't wait. All because you were so eager to trade up to someone more impressive. I didn't know. Matteo, please, I was frustrated. I didn't mean... You meant every word, Matteo said. And that's fine. You're allowed to outgrow a marriage. You're allowed to want more. But you're not allowed to treat me like I'm worthless while secretly planning to take half of what little you thought I had. You're not allowed to humiliate me in front of 200 people and then play the victim when I stop protecting you from the consequences of your choices. He stood up, walked to the door, opened it. The integration meeting resumes in 45 minutes. You should probably fix your makeup before then. Your new colleagues are already wondering why you didn't know your husband owned the company. I imagine explaining that you considered him too insignificant to pay attention to will be awkward. Jessica stood on shaking legs. What are you going to do? Are you going to fire me? Destroy my career? Fire you? No, you're genuinely good at your job, and Caldwell Industries doesn't waste talent over personal matters. Your position is secure as long as you perform. He paused. But I am going to file for divorce. Tonight, actually. Sandra Okonkwo has had the papers ready for 3 months. But the retention clause applies to executives who initiate divorce proceedings. I'm initiating them. You're not forfeiting anything. Yet. The relief on her face was almost insulting. She actually thought he was being generous. However, Matteo continued, my filing will include a complete financial disclosure of my assets, as required by California law. Every financial advisor, attorney, and accountant in your life is going to tell you that you're entitled to approximately $127 million. And you'll have to decide whether to fight for that money, knowing that everyone will learn you were planning to divorce me while thinking I was worth essentially nothing, or whether to walk away from the marriage with nothing and try to preserve some dignity. You're manipulating me. I'm giving you the same choice you were planning to give me, Matteo corrected. The difference is, I'm being honest about it. You have 24 months to figure out what you value more. The money you would have gotten anyway if you'd just been patient and kind, or your reputation as a self-made executive who didn't need anyone's help. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe worth more than Jessica's car. 42 minutes until the meeting resumes. I suggest you compose yourself. Jessica walked past him into the hallway. At the elevator, she turned back. Did you ever really love me? Or was this whole marriage just, what, a social experiment? For the first time since the meeting started, Matteo's careful control slipped. His voice cracked slightly. I loved you more than I've ever loved anyone. I would have given you everything, not because you earned it, but because that's what you do for the person you build a life with. But you looked at me and saw dead weight. You heard IT consultant and decided I wasn't worth your time anymore. So yes, I set this up. I let you sign that merger agreement. I let you pour wine on me in front of everyone because I needed to know if there was any part of the woman I married left inside you. If, when you realized who I really was, you'd feel remorse for how you treated me. He met her eyes. And you know what I see right now? I don't see remorse. I see you calculating whether you can still salvage the $127 million. I see you wondering if you can spin this to your friends, make yourself the victim of my deception. So no, Jessica, I don't think you ever really loved me either. I think you loved the support and stability I provided. And the moment you didn't need that anymore, you were ready to discard me for something shinier. The elevator doors opened. Jessica stepped in. This isn't over, she said. Yes, Matteo replied quietly. It really is. The doors closed. Matteo stood alone in the hallway of his company, the company he'd built, the company his wife had been so desperate to impress, and felt absolutely nothing. The divorce papers were delivered to Jessica on November 22, 2024, at 8:47 a.m. by a private process server who found her in the Caldwell Industries parking garage. Mateo had specifically chosen that moment right before a major presentation she was giving to Caldwell's board about Vertex's Q4 performance projections. He wanted her to walk into that meeting carrying the knowledge of what she'd lost. The papers included a complete financial disclosure that ran to 67 pages. Page 12 listed Mateo's 60% ownership stake in Caldwell Industries, currently valued at $847 million. Page 23 detailed the blind trusts and shell corporations that held those assets, all established before their marriage in 2012. Page 34 showed the appreciation of those assets during their 12 years of marriage, $254 million in increased value, of which Jessica was entitled to claim half under California community property law. Her theoretical settlement, $127 million, plus half of their $680,000 house, now worth $890,000 due to Los Angeles real estate appreciation, half of her Lexus, and half of various other minor marital assets. Total potential payout, $127,445,000. The papers also included a proposed settlement agreement. Mateo was offering her exactly $840,000, the current value of half their house, half of both vehicles, and half of their savings accounts. He was claiming his Caldwell ownership appreciation as separate property based on a technicality in the blind trust structure that Sandra Okonkwo had spent $89,000 in legal research to confirm. Jessica would have to fight in court for the full $127 million, and Mateo's team of attorneys, including Sandra Okonkwo, whose hourly rate was $950, and Thomas McBride, the $1,100 an hour divorce litigator who'd successfully defended 3 billionaires in contentious divorces, were prepared to make that fight as public and as expensive as possible. The presentation Jessica gave at 10 a.m. that morning was, by all accounts, a disaster. She stuttered through her slides, mixed up her revenue projections, and at one point forgot what quarter she was discussing. Richard Caldwell finally called a recess, and Jessica excused herself to the bathroom, where she locked herself in a stall and cried for 20 minutes. Mateo watched the video feed from his office. He felt a brief flicker of something that might have been pity. Then he remembered the wine dripping down his pants, the laughter. The adults are trying to conduct business here. The pity evaporated. Over the following 3 weeks, Jessica consulted with 4 different divorce attorneys. They all told her the same thing. She had a strong case for claiming half of the $254 million appreciation, but Mateo's legal team was formidable, and the case could drag on for 2 to 3 years. Legal fees would likely exceed $2 million, and the whole time, every detail of her marriage, her planned divorce before knowing Mateo's worth, her comments about him being dead weight, all of it would be public record. Your husband is offering you $840,000 to walk away quietly. Her second attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Lawson, who charged $780 an hour, told her on December 3rd. That's insulting given what you're entitled to, but you need to consider the optics. You're a senior executive at a company your husband owns. If this turns into a media circus, if the details of how you plan to divorce him while underestimating his net worth become public, your reputation in the corporate world will be destroyed. So I'm supposed to just accept less than 1% of what I'm legally owed? Jessica had demanded. No, you're supposed to negotiate. Ask for $10 million, maybe $15 million. Frame it as a quiet settlement that allows both of you to move on with dignity. He might go for it just to avoid the hassle of litigation. Jessica tried. She had her attorney send a counteroffer. $15 million in exchange for an expedited divorce with mutual NDAs about the financial details. Mateo's response came back within 24 hours. $840,000. Final offer. Take it or see you in court for the next 3 years. By mid-December, Jessica's life had become surreal. She was still working at Caldwell Industries, still reporting to Richard Caldwell, still attending meetings where Mateo would occasionally appear to discuss strategic initiatives. He was always professional, always polite, and absolutely cold. He treated her exactly like he treated every other executive, with respect for her competence and complete indifference to her personal existence. It was somehow worse than if he'd been cruel. Her Vertex colleagues had mostly figured out the situation by now. The corporate rumor mill was efficient, and whispers about the EVP who didn't know her husband owned the company had spread through every department. Some people pitied her, others judged her. A few thought the whole situation was darkly hilarious. Greg Turner, her former peer at Vertex, cornered her in the break room on December 18th. "Is it true?" he asked. "You really had no idea Mateo owned Caldwell?" Jessica had learned to keep her face neutral. "We kept our professional and personal lives separate." "Come on, Jessica. You introduced him as an IT consultant making maybe $70,000 a year. You poured wine on him at the signing ceremony. Everyone saw it." "That was an accident." "It wasn't," Greg said, not unkindly. "I was standing right there. You knocked his glass out of his hand and laughed. We all thought it was weird that you'd humiliate your husband like that, but we figured maybe you had a strange relationship dynamic. Now we know the truth. You didn't respect him because you thought he was beneath you." Jessica felt tears burning. "He lied to me for 12 years about who he was." "Did he? Or did you just never bother to ask? Never wondered how a guy supposedly making $73,000 could give you advice that kept landing you promotions and opportunities?" Greg shook his head. "I've been in 3 meetings now where Mateo walked through strategic analysis that was honestly brilliant. That doesn't come from someone who's just an IT consultant. You had to have known he was smarter than you were giving him credit for." He walked away, leaving Jessica alone with her coffee and her shame. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments, "I am enjoying this story," and tell us what you would have done in Mateo's situation. The breaking point came on January 8th, 2025, at a Caldwell Industries board dinner at Spago in Beverly Hills. It was an annual event for senior executives and board members, with significant others invited. Mateo brought Patricia Morrison, one of Caldwell's board members, not as a date, but as his dinner companion, since they'd been discussing a potential acquisition in the biotech sector. Jessica came alone. Her recent boyfriend, a vice president at a competing firm she'd started seeing in November, had broken things off when the divorce became public. "Too much baggage," he told her, "and honestly, your judgment seems questionable if you were married to a billionaire and didn't even know it." At dinner, Mateo gave a toast thanking everyone for their contributions to Caldwell's record-breaking year. The firm had increased assets under management by 23%, generating returns that had netted Mateo personally about $78 million in 2024 alone. "I also want to acknowledge a personal transition," Mateo said, raising his champagne glass. "As many of you know, my wife Jessica and I are divorcing. It's been a difficult process, but I'm grateful that we've both handled it professionally. Jessica remains a valuable executive in our Vertex integration, and I have full confidence in her abilities." It was gracious. It was kind. It made Jessica look petty by comparison when she couldn't even muster a smile. After dinner, she found Mateo alone on the restaurant's terrace, looking out at the Los Angeles lights. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "The public compliments, the professional respect. You're making me look worse by being nice." Mateo turned to face her. "I'm being nice because it's the truth. You are good at your job. This divorce isn't about punishing you professionally." "Then what is it about? Because offering me $840,000 when I'm entitled to $127 million sure feels like punishment." "It's about consequences," Mateo said quietly. "You made a series of choices, Jessica. You chose to value money and status over character. You chose to plan a divorce while thinking I was worth essentially nothing, strategizing with your attorney about how to minimize what I get. You chose to humiliate me publicly because you thought I couldn't fight back. He finished his champagne. I'm offering you $840,000 because that's what you'd have gotten if you'd divorced me while still thinking I was an IT consultant. It's the settlement you actually planned to give me. Well, actually you were planning to give me about $400,000, but I'm being generous with the math. The $127 million you're entitled to under California law, that's what you would have received if you'd been a partner. If you'd treated me with basic respect, if you'd valued our marriage for more than what you thought you could extract from it. So this is revenge? No, Matteo corrected. Revenge would be destroying your career, publicly humiliating you, making your life miserable. I'm not doing any of that. I'm simply letting you experience the natural consequences of your own values. You wanted to leave a man you thought was worth $73,000 and trade up to someone wealthier. Fine, you can have that freedom, but you don't also get to claim the money you would have had if you'd stayed and been a loving partner. Jessica's voice broke. I did love you. I lost myself in the ambition, in the career pressure. I made mistakes. Yes, you did. Matteo's voice softened slightly. And I'm not saying I handled everything perfectly. Maybe I should have told you about my wealth years ago. Maybe keeping that secret was its own form of manipulation. But Jessica, I heard you on the phone with Diane. I heard you call me dead weight. I watched you laugh when wine soaked through my pants in front of 200 people. And in all these weeks since you found out who I really am, not once have you actually apologized for how you treated me. Every conversation we've had has been about the money you're losing, not about the partner you discarded. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'm going to tell you something my mentor David Zimmerman told me when I was 24 years old, right after Richard and I started Caldwell Industries. He said, success doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you are. When you became successful, when you started making $680,000 a year and running executive meetings, it revealed that you valued status more than integrity, that you'd sacrifice relationship for reputation. And when I revealed my success to you, it showed that you only regret underestimating me, not mistreating me. That's not fair. Take the $840,000, Jessica. Sign the settlement. Move on with your career, which you're genuinely good at. Find someone from your world who matches your energy. And maybe, eventually, you'll realize that the money you lost wasn't the real cost of your choices. He walked back inside, leaving her alone on the terrace. On February 3rd, 2025, Jessica signed the settlement agreement. She received $840,000, her Lexus, and freedom from a marriage she'd already abandoned emotionally 2 years earlier. The divorce was finalized on February 28th with minimal press coverage. Sandra Okonkwo had ensured the records were sealed to protect both parties' privacy. Jessica continued working at Caldwell Industries for another 8 months. She was professional, competent, and completely miserable. Every meeting with Matteo reminded her of what she'd lost. Not the money, though that stung, but the life she could have had with a man who'd loved her enough to support her career, even while she belittled his. In October 2025, she accepted a position at a competitor firm in San Francisco. The salary was $720,000 plus stock options. She moved into a luxury apartment in Pacific Heights, started dating a successful attorney, and tried to convince herself she'd made the right choices. Matteo remained at Caldwell Industries, though he did start appearing more publicly. Business magazines interviewed him about his investment strategies. He spoke at a Stanford conference about the future of private equity. He was profiled in Forbes with the headline, "The Billionaire Nobody Knew, Matteo Rivera's 19-year secret." The article briefly mentioned his recent divorce, noting only that he'd been married for 12 years to a corporate executive and that they'd separated amicably. Jessica's name wasn't mentioned. Matteo had ensured that. He didn't date anyone for over a year. When he finally did, it was a woman named Dr. Leah Martinez, a marine biologist earning $89,000 a year researching ocean conservation. She had no idea who Matteo was when they met at a charity event for environmental causes. She thought he was just another donor who cared about protecting coral reefs. On their third date, when she insisted on splitting the $73 check for pizza, Matteo laughed harder than he had in years. "What's funny?" Leah had asked, smiling but confused. "Nothing," Matteo said, "just you have no idea how refreshing it is to split a pizza bill with someone." He told her about his wealth on their sixth date, sitting in his modest Honda Accord, the same car he'd driven while married to Jessica, because he genuinely didn't care about luxury vehicles. "Wait, you're that Matteo Rivera?" Leah had said, pulling up the Forbes article on her phone. "The private equity guy worth $800 million? Currently $891 million, but who's counting?" She'd absorbed this information, then said, "And you've been driving this 2015 Honda, why exactly?" "Because it gets me where I need to go, and I prefer spending money on things that matter, like ocean conservation research." He'd paused. "Is this going to be weird now?" "Probably a little," Leah admitted. "But mostly I'm wondering why you didn't tell me sooner. I wanted to make sure you liked me for me. Matteo, you're a guy who gets excited about analyzing market trends and who volunteers at a children's literacy program every Tuesday. I liked you before I knew about the money. The money just means you can afford better pizza next time." They were engaged 11 months later. The ring cost $47,000, but Leah made him donate an equal amount to her ocean research lab. They married in a small ceremony on Catalina Island, with 40 guests and a reception that cost $18,000, because Leah insisted anything more expensive was wasteful. Matteo had never been happier. In March 2027, 2 years and 4 months after the divorce, Jessica saw the wedding announcement in the society pages. She was living in San Francisco, engaged to her attorney boyfriend, planning a wedding that would cost $340,000 and include 300 guests. She looked at the photo of Matteo and Leah, taken on a beach, both of them laughing, windblown and casual and genuinely joyful, and felt something crack inside her chest. She'd lost $127 million. But looking at that photo, she realized Matteo had been right. The money hadn't been the real cost. She'd lost the one person who'd loved her before the corner office, before the $680,000 salary, before the Armani suits and the ambitious climb. She'd lost the partner who'd opened doors for her without asking for credit, who'd celebrated her success even as she dismissed his worth, who'd been willing to give her everything until she proved she only wanted what she thought he couldn't provide. She'd gained wealth, status, a career she could be proud of. She'd achieved everything she thought she wanted, and she'd never felt more empty. Jessica didn't go to Matteo's wedding. She did send a card, the only communication between them since the divorce was finalized. It said simply, "I'm sorry, not for the money, for everything else. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be." Matteo received it on his honeymoon in Costa Rica. He showed it to Leah. "Are you going to respond?" Leah asked. Matteo thought about it for a long moment, thought about 12 years of marriage, 18 months of calculated revenge, and 2 years of healing. Thought about wine-stained khakis and billion-dollar secrets, and the price of underestimating people. "No," he said finally. "Some chapters don't need epilogues. They just need to end." He tore up the card and threw it in the recycling bin. Then he took his wife's hand, and they walked down to the beach to watch the sunset together. Two people who valued each other more than any dollar amount could measure. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's letting people face the consequences of their own actions while you move forward into a life they can't touch. Jessica had learned that lesson the hard way. She'd valued wealth over worth, status over substance, and in doing so, she'd lost something that could never be bought back. Matteo had learned something too, that love without respect is worthless, that hiding who you are never works in the long run, and that the right person doesn't care whether you're worth $73,000 or $891 million. They care about who you are when nobody's watching, when there's nothing to gain, when love is the only currency that matters. As for the $127 million Jessica could have had, Mateo donated most of it to scholarships for first-generation college students from low-income backgrounds. Kids like he'd been at 22, brilliant and ambitious and deserving of opportunities they couldn't afford. He named the scholarship fund after David Zimmerman, the mentor who'd taught him that success reveals character and that the best contracts aren't the ones that trap people. They're the ones that show people who they really are. Success doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you are. Jessica's wealth and status exposed her willingness to value money over character, proving she'd discard a devoted partner for someone more impressive. Mateo learned that love without respect is worthless, and that the right person values who you are, not what you're worth. The real cost of Jessica's choices wasn't the $127 million she lost. It was the irreplaceable partner who'd loved and supported her unconditionally. Sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment, but simply letting people face the natural consequences of their actions while you build a better life they can't touch. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.